I just had something crazy happen to me. 40 million a year e-commerce brand asked me for some consulting. And I want to share in this video what I found. This is actually really crazy because you would think a 40 million a year brand has everything figured out. And for a lot of ways, they have a lot figured out. However, you'll be shocked when you hear that still, even brands of that size, there's always room for improvement. And I think that's a really good lesson throughout this video, and really just in life, is that even people who you look at and brands that you look at that have it all together, nothing is ever as glamorous as it really is on the inside. Okay, so let's walk through a few things that I learned. So this brand, I audited their ad account, I worked with their marketing team, and I pretty much just told them what were the bottlenecks holding them back. So for context, the brand came to me and they had a problem. Their problem is that they weren't growing. They've actually stalled this year. And a competitor of theirs had blown past them. A competitor who a couple years ago was barely on the scene. It was like some small noob, but then something happened and they have just blown past them. They're frustrated thinking, how could this happen? We were the big dog in the space. We were the #1 brand, but now we are stagnant. We are actually not growing at all. And our profit margin is shrinking, but someone's blowing past us. What the heck is happening? So they believe that problem was in their paid strategy. And it was. That was a big part of their issue because for the longest time, because they were the big dog, they have a lot of organic traffic, like they're masters at SEO, they're masters at making content in general. And for the longest time, they survived and were extremely profitable out off that business model. However, what that meant was that they significantly underinvested in advertising for years. So what were some of the things that I found? Well, the first thing that I found was they really didn't understand the game they need to play. And I know that sounds kind of obvious, but bear with me. The game you're playing when you're trying to take market share, when you are trying to scale aggressively, the harsh reality is it's how close can I fly to the sun on my paid advertising and not get burned. What that means is you have to be okay with making very little margin or just breaking even, or some cases losing a little bit of money on the first sale because you're after volume. Because if you know the repeat purchase rate and you know the lifetime value of your customer base, that money will come back. So for example, this brand, I asked them, I said, hey, well, what is your 30-day or 60-day buyback? What that is when someone new buys from you, what's the average cohort of money you're going to get back from those groups of people over 30 or 60 days? You can do a cohort analysis to find that number. You can use other platforms to find that number. But for example, let's say you have an average order value of $100. On average, new customers spend $100 with us. But then over the first 30 days, on average, that $100 turns into $115, which means that's an additional $15, right? Then over 60 days, that $115 becomes $130. So what that means is I could actually break even on the first sale because on average, I know I'm gonna get another $15 to another $30 in the 30 and 60-day window. And the reality is when you are trying to scale, it is a volume game. If you are trying to be so conservative that my ads must be a 4 or 5x, get ready for someone else to blow past you, because all the brands that we work with and that I know, the ones that scale, they understand that new customers is it. Whoever buys the most new customers wins the game. Full stop. But what that means is over time, you should start to see your returning customers and your engaged email list increasing that margin. So for example, we have an 8-figure brand right now. They're doing $2 million a month. Of that $2 million a month, about $1.3 million of that is new customers because they're spending a lot of money. Then $700,000 of that is returning customers. But all the advertising is focused on new customers. So what that means is over time, the returning customer base, returning customer revenue is increasing in line with new customer revenue. So what that means is they could literally turn all ads off tomorrow, live off returning customers, not forever, but for a short period of time, and they would be 60-70% profitable. That's an extreme example, but I want you to understand the game of e-commerce, whoever buys the most new customers wins. Okay, so that's the first thing. So this brand, they were severely underinvesting in new customers, and that was a big problem. In addition to that, also, they just weren't making enough creative. These guys were probably making, maybe a couple ads a month, and they were spending about $80,000 a month, which seems crazy to me. The brands that we work with are spending that much amount of money. We're making 40 to 50 ads at a minimum a month, because the more spend, the more creative needs you have. And that's another reason why they're stagnant, is because they weren't testing enough. And whoever's running their ad account just wasn't testing enough as well. So another thing as well was they just didn't have a system of how they make creative. So I want to share this with you. I'm also going to share my screen because this is something I prepared for them as well that I think might be interesting to you guys. Is I mentioned this already, is they weren't testing enough. And so I made a previous video on how many ads you should be making and testing. But then also what I found in their ad account was that they didn't have any rules that they operate by. What I mean by that is when you're running an ad account, you want to have rules you live by. What are my scale rules? What are my kill rules? What are my graduate rules? And they didn't have any rules of how they're making decisions. So for example, how we do it is, and I recommend that they do the same thing, is that they need to have rules based off CPA. So CPA off of like a 1-day click or 7-day click. But then in addition to that is based off of those rules will determine how much creative they need. So I actually gave them just a quick formula that based off their budget and how risk adverse they are in terms of how much they're willing to spend before they make decisions, how much creative variations that they needed. The other thing is they didn't have a process for making creative. I think that's the biggest reason I find a lot of people struggle scaling is besides the ad account making the right decisions is they just don't have a process of how to get that creative. And same thing with them, which is crazy because from an SEO perspective, they're making 3 articles a day. So they know how to make creative, but just not quite ad creative. And so I told them about the sprint process, what we used to make 9,000 ads a year. And using that process is if you get the team, get the right functions in place. And the other problem they had was just they'd had no creative diversity. If you looked at their ad account and their ads library, of the 3 to 9 ads they were making that took them 2 to 3 months to make, all the ads looked the same. Every single one. The issue with that is you're not going to stand out. And once someone sees one of your ads, Meta's going to then deliver that ad to that person again. But as soon as they see an ad that looks just like it, they're going to scroll past it. That's why we buy into creative diversity. So as an example, just for one of the brands that we work with, of the ads that we make, you can see how diverse they are. Almost no ad looks the same. These maybe kind of look the same, but besides that, everything else looks different. And that's a big part of it. Is so creative diversity, when you're making it, the big part to stress here is how can I relay the same concept, the same value proposition, but in a different way. It can be done in different ad formats. It can be done in different ad types. It can be done in different ad qualities. That's a big part, in our opinion, of a brand who scales quite successfully is creative diversity. The next part was they wanted to scale, but they really didn't understand their numbers deep enough to understand what product lines to scale. So for example, I showed them this sheet that we have and it kind of blew their mind. I said, listen, for every product you have, your marketing team needs to know for every single product, what is every single piece of cost so they know the gross margin of that product. Because until they do that, there's a good chance they may scale campaigns or a product line and be losing money on it or losing a lot of money. For example, we had a fashion brand who did something similar that they just looked across their average margin for products across the board and they said it was like 67%. But the reality is their best-selling product was an average of 51% margin and then other products kind of made up that difference and they were like 70%. And they were scaling their best-selling product losing money because they just took the average. No, you got to take per product. And then what I told them, I was like, listen, you need to have a way to track performance per collection or per product because they weren't doing that. They just had bunch of ads grouped together in a campaign, just trying to scale it. And I was like, no, you need to separate how much marketing dollars you're spending on one product type or one product line, as long as you understand that the margins are the same, and then how much revenue that actual line is generating you on the back end of Shopify. Because that's a big part of what we do for our brands is we're looking at per collection or per product type, how much marketing dollars we're spending on and how much revenue that is also generating. If you do not do that, what's going to happen is, like I told you a few moments ago, is you may look in Meta and be like, oh man, this thing's crushing. But reality, sometimes someone sees one ad for a product, goes to your website and buys a different product. So which one is actually helping and beneficial? If you don't see that using this method, you may just keep spending money on that campaign, but it's actually not driving the net new sales for that product line. That's why we do it this way, because if a particular campaign about a particular product is not converting, then we need to pivot. We need to change the strategy because we care about efficiency. And by doing this, it reveals what actual product lines and ad spend is actually most profitable because we also know margins per product type. And then we just keep scaling that and keep pumping it. So shockingly enough, this 40 million a year brand, not everything was perfect. Not everything was all roses and sunshine. There's a lot of things they need to do to increase their capability, because I was pretty shocked that a brand that size wasn't doing these things. They didn't have their P&L. Their marketing team was taking a look at. Their marketing team didn't know the margins of their products. The marketing team wasn't doing campaign reporting on specific product lines. They weren't doing creative diversity. They had literally no creative process whatsoever. They're just randomly making ads and shockingly under delivering a number of ads, and they had no criteria of how they make decisions in their campaign spending. After I showed this to them, the founder literally told me, he's like, oh my gosh, we've been spending too little money. And then number two, he said, oh my gosh, I knew we should have done this a year ago. We should have been just acquiring as many customers as possible, as aggressively as possible. And that's the name of the game for e-commerce. So if you want to scale to 8 figures, I'm telling you, the brands that we work with that do this, that is the game you have to play. What's the most amount of money I can spend to acquire a customer? And as long as I know my returning customer rate and I know my margin margins? Can I be okay with very little margin on the first sale or break even because I know I'm growing that returning customer base? And then what those brands do is they launch new products, new styles, new flavors, whatever, and gets those people to come back. And that's why I told this brand, I was like, listen, you need to be very aggressive in your customer growth and then use new products, different flavors, different styles, whatever, as the vehicle to get those people to come back or subscription. Because if you do that, you will blow past where you're at right now because you've gotten so aggressive on customer acquisition. So those are the lessons from a 40 million year brand. If you want to be in a group with other e-commerce brands learning lessons like these and learning lessons of what's working for them, please join our D2C Dojo mentoring group for e-commerce brands. Click the link in the description. You can watch the video as explain all about it, but it is awesome. We're already getting brands making more money from it, and I'm super excited. I love running it. If that's interesting to you, click the link. If you have questions, comment below. I'll see you in the next video.